Before you grade your next clip in DaVinci Resolve, there are a few settings that almost no one talks about. I can almost guarantee you don't know at least one of them, even if you've been using Resolve for years. Once these are set correctly, grading becomes easier, more consistent, and more predictable. Let's jump right in. Let's start with how the contrast slider behaves in DaVinci Resolve. By default, the contrast control in Primaries panel applies an S-curve. That means every time you increase contrast, Resolve is automatically compressing your highlights and shadows. For many people, that's perfectly fine, but here's where it becomes important. There are already multiple places where contrast shaping happens in a grade. LUTs, look development plugins, output transforms, and of course your own curve adjustments. So if you're not aware of it, you can easily end up stacking S-curves without realizing it. Personally, I prefer having a linear contrast option available. With linear response, midtones stay more predictable, and I decide exactly when and where the S-shape gets introduced. This one is completely optional, but if you want to switch to linear contrast, go to Project Settings, General Options, and uncheck Use S-curve for contrast. And if you are working in DaVinci Wide Gamut, set your contrast pivot to 0.336. That's the middle gray point in that color space, and it makes contrast adjustments feel much more natural, keeping your exposure intact. Next, in the same settings menu, there's another option most people overlook. It's called Luminance Mixer Defaults to 0. Turn it on. By default, every new node in Resolve starts with Luma Mix set to 100. And what that means is Resolve is constantly trying to protect brightness for you. So when you push one color channel, let's say red, Resolve automatically adjusts green and blue behind the scenes to keep the image at the same luminance. It sounds helpful, but in practice it often makes color work harder. When Luma Mix is set to 0, the channels are no longer linked. Red stays red, green stays green, and nothing is being compensated without you knowing. This gives you much cleaner control when matching shots, balancing skin tones, or making subtle color adjustments while watching your scopes. Before we continue, I want to quickly show you a tool I use all the time while grading in Resolve. It's called Nailer. It's an indicator DCTL plugin designed to help you nail exposure, contrast, saturation, balance, skin tones, clean neutrals, and even composition, without constantly jumping between scopes and other tools. Let me show you how I use it. After checking my exposure and contrast, I usually look at overall balance. It overlays 4 dominant color vectors directly on the image. And together with the Vectroscope, it becomes very easy to see where the image is leaning and bring it back into alignment. Then I double check my neutrals. This blue overlay shows me whether my blacks, whites, or in this case my gray card are truly neutral, or if there's unwanted color contamination hiding in the image. And when I'm not fully sure if my skin tones are sitting where they should, I switch to Nail Skin Tones. It shows me exactly where the hue is landing. Natural skin is in a single color. It's a mix of slightly greenish and slightly reddish tones. So instead of pushing everything toward one flat orange, I make sure the skin sits somewhere balanced with proper separation. If needed, I'll adjust the reds slightly in my hue versus hue curve to bring it into place. It's also very useful for checking reference images or movie stills to see where exposure, saturation, or skin tones sit in certain shots. Nailer doesn't replace scopes, it just makes it easier to see what's happening in your image. And it comes with detailed instructions on how to use each feature properly. If you want to check it out, I left a link in the description. Now, let's get back to the video. This one is about how Resolve itself affects your perception of color. By default, DaVinci Resolve uses a slightly bluish user interface. You might not even notice it, but your eyes are constantly adapting to it. And when the interface has a color bias, your grade can slowly drift without you realizing why. Switching the interface to neutral gray removes that influence. To change this, open Preferences, go to User, then UI Settings, and enable Use Gray Background for User Interface. It's a small setting, but one that helps keep your decisions more precise. This next setting is a huge workflow upgrade, especially if you use a fixed node structure on your clips. By default, when you switch between clips and the color page, DaVinci Resolve selects the last adjusted node. That sounds logical, but it quickly slows you down. If you are working properly, most of your clips share the same dedicated node layout. One node for exposure, one for balance, one for look, and so on. Now imagine you are balancing exposure across an entire scene. Every time you switch clips, Resolve jumps to a different node, so you keep clicking, reselecting, and breaking your flow. When you change the setting, Resolve stays on the same node as you move from clip to clip. That means you can ride exposure, contrast, or balance across the whole timeline consistently and without touching the mouse more than you need to. To enable it, open Preferences, go to User, then Color, find Switching Clips and change it to Select Same Node. This next setting affects how LUTs are processed, and it's something most people never touch. It's called 3D Lut Interpolation. By default, DaVinci Resolve uses a simple trilinear interpolation method. It works, but it's not the cleanest option, especially if you work with LUTs. When interpolation quality is lower, you can start seeing subtle issues like banding or rough gradients, especially on lower bit depth footage. Switching this setting to tetrahedral gives you more precise LUT processing. To change this, go to Project Settings, open Color Management, scroll down to Lookup Tables and set 3D Lookup Interpolation to tetrahedral. Next one is about how you use your scopes, specifically the Vectroscope. Most people leave it in the default mode and never touch it again, but Resolve actually lets you change what part of the image the Vectroscope is analyzing. You can switch it to show only lows, mids, highs, or the entire image. And this is extremely useful for balancing. Here's how I use it. If I'm balancing shadows, I switch the Vectroscope to lows. That shows me only the color information in the darker parts of the image, which makes it much easier to see unwanted color contamination in the blacks. If I'm working on skin tones or my subject, I switch to mids. Now I'm only looking at the mid-tone information. And if I want to see how highlights behave, I switch to highs. Now, if you have a second display, the best practice is to actually set up 4 separate vectorscopes. One for lows, one for mids, one for highs, and one showing all. And one more thing. Inside the vectorscope, if you click the 3 dots menu, you can enable the 75% and 100% targets. The 100% marks show the outer limit of saturation. That can be useful for stylized looks or web delivery, but for broadcast you should stay within the 75% targets. And even if you are grading for YouTube, I still recommend trying to keep strong colors inside or near the 75% range. It keeps your image clean and helps avoid clipping or oversaturation. Using separate vectorscope modes for lows, mids and highs together with the 75% guides makes balancing and saturation control far more precise. This last one is more of a workflow tip and is especially useful if you are grading on a single screen or laptop. Screen space matters when you are grading, and by default DaVinci Resolve wastes quite a bit of it on things you don't always need. 2 shortcuts can make a big difference here. The first one lets you hide the page navigation, the row of page icons on the bottom. The second shortcut is Enhanced Viewer. This temporarily hides the timeline, nodes and side panels and gives priority to the image. This is incredibly useful when you are grading on a laptop screen. I use this all the time when I'm traveling or working on a single display. To set this up, go to Keyboard Customization, search for Show Page Navigation and bind it to a shortcut that feels natural for you. Enhanced Viewer by default is set to Option or Alt+F, but you can change it to wherever works best for you. Once you start using these, grading on a small screen feels much more comfortable. And that's the setup I use to keep my color grading predictable. Small adjustments, but they make a real difference over time. And if you want to check out the tools I use in my day-to-day projects, go watch this next video. See you in the next one.